Okay, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. You have been a special person in my life since last August, was when we first met.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
through our friend Julie Slattery, who is very special and leads Authentic Intimacy. And we were at a retreat. And I remember, Jennifer, you stood up as we were introducing ourselves around the room, and you talked about female pleasure and orgasm and genitals. And you just named all of these like red hot topics in your introduction of yourself, of what you like to talk about and what your ministry involves. And you were so brave and clear and unashamed and hilarious. I thought, I have got to know her. I need some of what she has. And I felt like you had so much courage. And my listeners know that I'm on a journey to finding courage and to finding freedom. And recently, actually, I did a podcast on sex mentors and why we need them and why we need to be able to have conversations about this to even be discipled, as Julie Slattery calls it sexual discipleship. So here you are, friends. You're meeting my sex mentor, my friend mentor. We talk about all sorts of things, including marriage and intimacy. But Jennifer is also what did you do in your normal daytime? Tell us what your normal daytime, apart from talking about sex at conferences and stuff.
Yes, I'm kind of known as the sex lady, but that is actually just a part of
Uh-huh.
what I do. It is one of my favorite parts. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I've been in
Yes.
practice for 26 years and I do trauma recovery work. I
Mm-hmm.
work a lot with folks that are dealing with anxiety and depression. I do some couples counseling. I also work with women, married women who are, wanting to just become a more sexual person in their marriage and wanting
Mm-hmm.
to overcome any issues that they may have around sexual pleasure or the way they think about sex, building emotional and spiritual and physical intimacy. So that's another thing that I do, but I do love to talk about sex.
Oh, it's so good. Well, I love it. I'll have to tell you guys, even just a little behind the scenes, after I cornered Jennifer in the bathroom after that introduction session. And I said, hey, I heard you introduce yourself. I really want to get to know you. I feel like what you have is what I need. And I'd love to understand more of who you are and how you've become who you've become. And the thing that made me giggle the most was how easily Jennifer could talk about the words like clitoris or genitals or all these things that make me want to go, I shouldn't say that out loud. And we even sat on a bench outside of the meeting room where we were. And she's like, here, just practice. Say penis, penis, penis. Say clitoris, say vagina. And I'm like, okay, I have to practice saying these things. And I told my husband, I came home and he laughed. And sometimes he teases me about that. And we still have to practice. But that just shows you, I talk about sex. I've been thinking about sex. I've been studying the theology of our bodies, the goodness of God in sexuality for the last 15 years. And still, I struggle with being integrated and not being ashamed of my body. And I talk a lot on this podcast about my healing journey. And I'm pretty vulnerable because I want everybody to know who's listening that you're not alone and that nobody has really arrived, but that we're on this journey to recovering God's good gift of our sexuality, that he's not ashamed of it and that he's not embarrassed about it. And it's not a surprise to him, but that we can celebrate it with purity and we can celebrate it with a sense of joy and innocence because he is the one who designed it. So Jennifer, as I was praying this morning, about our chat, the word extravagant came to my mind because I often, when I'm trying to renew my mind, as the scriptures say, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, I try to imagine the garden and what sex must have been like in the garden before sin corrupted it in Genesis 1, before it got yucky, before it got painful, because most of us know about the painful side of sex because we felt it in one way or the other. But I just think what was on God's heart when he made the woman's body? I mean, he was having a good time, wasn't he?
Yes, he
He
absolutely
was.
was. Yes.
He was
And
not holding back.
yes, I always laugh and talk about that the male genitalia is really kind of a glorified water pistol. I mean, it's not that complicated. And but if you look at female anatomy, it is complicated. There's a cycle that everything is different every day of the month in terms of
Right.
hormone levels and what's happening. And so I feel like God created Adam and then he said, Jesus, Holy Spirit, watch this, and created this really complicated, but really amazing female anatomy, and then just the way that our sexuality works. So we're men are 1.0 and we're 2.0. I think, but it does mean that as women, we do have to purposefully educate ourselves about our bodies, because we don't, in general, women are not handling their genitals like multiple times in a day. A man handles his genitals. He has to in order to urinate.
Right.
But women don't. We might wipe ourselves off with the tissue, but that's about it. And so we just don't have the comfort and the familiarity with those genitals. And yet, if we don't understand them and how they work, we can really miss out on the full expression of sexuality in our marriage and in ourself.
Yeah, it seems like not only it's I don't know, we talk about the purity culture a lot, coming from kind of the don't do it and shut everything down. And so then you're supposed to be a good girl, or maybe if you weren't in the church and you had a lot of other experiences, you also have this feeling when you come into the church that that was not good. So no matter what your background is, I know that was not good, but now I'm married. How do I actually appreciate and know that my body is good? And how do I get educated without feeling icky? Or how do I even explore what's there for possibility without feeling ashamed that I'm crossing the line into masturbation? Or, I think there's just a lot of questions that women have. And maybe even our husbands have, that they're not really sure how to explore us either. And if we don't know our bodies, how can we help them know our bodies? And so one of the things that I love that you talk about, Jennifer, is called the sexual fire triangle. Can you explain that? Because I feel like that is a brilliant map for breaking it down for us so that we understand how complicated we are, but also we have a bit of a map to see, oh, if I can see it in this triangular way, I will have more of a grid for how to tune into my body and my orgasmic potential.
Oh, I'd love to talk about that, Francie. So if you were ever a Girl Scout, maybe you learned about the fire triangle, which are the 3 things that you need to create fire. So you need some kind of fuel like wood or gasoline, and you need oxygen, and you need heat. And if you put those 3 things together, then you have this white hot reaction and fire results. But if you remove any of those, so if you pour water and take away the heat, then the fire goes out. And so, or if you smother the oxygen and then the fire goes out. And I think that we have 3 things as women that we have to tend to in order to keep our sexual fire going in a long-term marriage. And so the parallel of the fuel would be a healthy, sexually responsive body. And a lot of the education that I do when I speak is educating people, women, about their bodies. Because it's the kind of stuff your mother doesn't tell you unless I'm your mother, but it's the kind of stuff we really need to know. And then the other part of the triangle, what would be the heat, would be that emotional connection between a husband and a wife. And then finally, the oxygen part is your attitudes. What do you think about sex? What do you believe about sex? And if you have healthy biblical attitudes towards sex, that helps keep your fire going. So if you're not emotionally connected, that can smother your sexual fire. If you have negative attitudes, unbiblical. Notice I'm not saying religious, because some religious attitudes towards sex are not biblical attitudes towards sex. And I know that's a big part of the work that you've done, Francie, is helping women gain this full picture of how God sees sex. And he is a fan. He created it, and he is a fan of married sex. And so you put all those 3 things together: the healthy, sexually responsive body, emotional connection in marriage, and healthy biblical attitudes, positive attitudes towards sex, and a woman's sexual fire will keep burning. And so we just have to intentionally think about all 3 of those things, and maybe where we need a little tune up.
Okay. Well, you have a course or a webcast. It's really good. I've done it. I sat one night and just did it all. It's called Fan the Flame. So I
Yes.
really recommend going to check that out to get the full view of the fire triangle, because you really go through all of those areas really well. On this podcast, I hope we're gaining traction with our attitudes about sex and our emotional connection and kind of bringing the Holy Spirit into all of it. But one of the things that I've been growing in the most the last few years and realizing how much growth I needed is my body. I feel ashamed of my body, whether I want to admit it or not. And I know that because it's hard for me to receive. And I feel disconnected from my body because I know that some things have the potential to be pleasure and I feel nothing. And maybe I'm tired or whatever. I'd love for you to help us unpack this body element of how to fan the flame with our connection to our body so that we can become orgasmic. Because I even remember when you said, I help women figure out how they can become orgasmic. I thought, is that even allowed? And that was like the religious part of me. Is that conversation even allowed? Like, how does that work? And I know better, but I'm still fighting that religious voice of shame. And that's the bottom line is, you know what the deal is? God loves sex so much. He made it, he designed it with extravagance, holding nothing back. And the enemy hates it with all of his guts because of how powerful it is in a marriage and in a home. And if he can destroy our connection to our bodies as image bearers, he's driven a huge wedge in our capacity to have the full expression of sexual intimacy that God designed. So break it down for us, the body part. If we have time, we'll get into the others, but I don't want to miss your expertise on what are the barriers with our body? How does our body work? Let's start there. Some of those ideas.
Yes. Well, and it's so funny because as women, we're very comfortable talking about our elbows and our eyes and our ears. And
yes.
But when we start talking about our genitals, we call it down there. Like it's Australia, just so uncomfortable with that. And so I loved when you shared the story about how we were saying, you just have to get used to saying those words. I had to get used to saying them. I wasn't comfortable back when I started graduate school back in 1987, many moons ago. And so I would go around the house just saying penis, vagina, labia. My husband loved it. He thought it was a great homework assignment to get comfortable with that. And so for women to understand, okay, first of all, the clitoris, because not everybody knows where it's at or what its purpose is. And so getting women, this is where if you've never taken a hand mirror and just looked at your genitals to understand where things are, I tell you, Francie, a great question just ask your husband is, what do you think women pee out of? And it is amazing how many men think women pee out of their vagina. They don't even know that women have a urethra, that there's another hole above the vagina that they urinate out of. So again, we're just ignorant, and we could learn this. And so that's so great that people are listening to this. So understanding the clitoris, that is actually the focus of pleasure for women. And men tend to think it's going to be all about the vagina because the penis goes in the vagina. And their thought is, oh, okay, this is where the orgasm is going to happen. And then when their wife is not orgasmic through intercourse, which is the penis and a vagina, then they're like, what's wrong with me? Or what's wrong with her? When in fact, almost half of women really have a lot of difficulty ever having an orgasm with intercourse because the vagina is at the top of your genitalia. So you have, as a woman, everything's kind of hidden away. Whereas on a man, it's just out there in front of God and everybody. I mean, you can't miss it. There it is. And with women, it's not that way. It's hidden behind those the labia, the inner and the outer lips of the genitalia. And so that's another thing when you're talking to your little girl about her genitals, not everything is her vagina. And we tend to just sort of refer to genitalia as vagina. That is part of your genitalia,
right?
But there's a lot more to it. And so understanding that's why in Fan the Flame, I have anatomical drawings and talk about this. These are the different parts.
I love
so that you understand that. Yeah. Because a lot of us, the last time we saw one of those was in 10th grade health class, and we were so embarrassed
You didn't want to look at
that
it.
we didn't want to look at it.
Yeah.
And certainly never took the time to like have a diagram and actually get a mirror and look at it on ourselves.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, this is what that is. And so at the top of those, the inner lips of the female genitalia is the clitoris. And if you were to take a penis and shrink it down to the size of a pea, that's basically what the clitoris is. So all the nerve endings that are in your husband's penis are in your clitoris.
Wow.
And actually all that network of nerves, they go back up into your body. So a lot of that arousal and that what we call vasocongestion, which is blood flow. It's a fancy word for blood flow. On a man, it's very obvious when vasocongestion is happening because you see the penis become erect. But on a woman, if she's becoming sexually aroused, that's happening too. She's having blood flow, and she needs that blood flow, Francie, in order to have an orgasm.
Okay.
But like we could see if our husband's not getting an erection. We can't see it on ourselves. So a lot of times we are rushing ourselves. We don't have the necessary vasocongestion to be orgasmic, but we're thinking, well,
it just didn't work.
Got an erection. Right. He's got an erection, so it must be time. But we don't know, okay, but my body isn't there yet. And so understanding women need a lot more time. Now, the older you get, the more likely you are to have an orgasm. So as you get
really? That's good news.
It is good news, because the older he gets, the more likely he is to have erectile issues. Like the statistic is like,
out.
Exactly. You kind of like, there's this one day when you're in your 40s when it works, when it works perfectly. So as we're getting into our 30s and our 40s, it's becoming easier for the female body to be orgasmic. So sometimes when women are in their 20s, they're like, oh, this is kind of disappointing. He wants to do it all the time. And I'm just not, really, I don't get the payoff. But understand, age is on your side up until the age of menopause, when it can become more difficult to have an orgasm. And the average age of menopause is around 51 and a half.
Okay.
So usually you got some real good times in your late 30s and your 40s.
So how do you know when the blood flow is happening, or how do you get that going, if that's the key to having the pleasure?
So the clitoris does become engorged, but keep in mind, it's only the size of a pea. So it's very small. And a lot of times it has a clitoral hood over it, which is a little fold of skin. And as it becomes more excited, it will kind of contract back under that hood. And so sometimes for husbands, they'll be like, oh, where'd it go? It disappeared. But it's because it's becoming so sensitive that direct contact could become too like painful, because it's so this is, again, I know it's kind of awkward. It can feel clinical to be like, okay, give me a pelvic exam, but really it is helpful to really look at what you're doing, to understand. Otherwise your husband's just down there rubbing stuff like he's trying to start a fire with two sticks. And you're like, what are you doing? And then men are sensitive about feeling like they're incompetent. And so that's why I encourage couples, set aside a couple of hours, one day, get a babysitter, maybe go to a hotel room, or drop your kids off at somebody else's house if you've got kids, and really let's have sex school. And let's really look at it and educate ourselves about my genitalia and all about that. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that, and this is where it'd be easier if we had a diagram. If we look at a woman's genitalia in a cross section, so like if you're turned sideways, then you can see inside a woman's body, that clitoris, it actually kind of forms like an arc inside and goes down to what we call the G spot.
Okay, the famous G spot.
The famous G spot, which some people say, oh, well, it doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, then you haven't looked hard enough if you don't think it
you
exists.
haven't spent enough time exploring.
Yes, exactly. Because you can feel it inside the vagina. And it's about, in an unaroused vagina, it's maybe an inch or two, depending on the size of a woman, up into the vagina. In a aroused vagina, it might even be a little bit more than 2 inches, maybe even 3 inches inside the vagina. It just depends on the size of a woman, but it's rough. It feels like a sponge. And the rest of the vagina feels slick and smooth. But it feels rougher. And when it's not aroused, it's about the size of a dime. And then as you get aroused, it grows in size. And it is like the root ball, if you will, of all of those nerves in the clitoris.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Yes. So it's very sensitive to sexual stimulation. If you're not aroused yet, though, it's not going to feel that much. Again, so it's like sometimes men find out, your husband's like, oh, X marks the spot, let's just get in there and get right to the G spot. But if you're not aroused yet, it's not going to feel that great and that pleasurable. So there needs to be that stimulation. And for a lot of women, they're moving through foreplay so fast that they never feel a wanting, a yearning, a sense of like where your pelvis is like moving, and there's a sense of, I want something in my vagina. I want more of this touch.
So that's what we're looking for, is like,
yes,
get yourself going, because you should be able to feel that. A healthy woman should be able to feel that desire.
Yes. And that, but again, if you're, basically he's got an erection, he's excited, he just goes right to your breast, right to your genitals. And then he's like, let's go. And then it's kind of like if you're riding a bike and the person, and he's always riding faster than you, and you're always struggling to keep up. The bike ride is not fun.
Yeah.
So whoever has the lower desire needs to set the pace.
That's really good.
But for us as women, we can feel like, gosh, he's going to get bored, or I feel selfish, or we're not raised and socialized to ask for what we need. And a lot of times we don't even know what we need sexually. That's why there needs to be just this like time of like, I'm educating myself about my body with him. And
will he get bored?
Well, no, he's got a
how do we counteract that lie of, oh, I should rush because this is taking too long?
You know what? Just ask your husband, are you bored? Now, see, Francie, let's be honest. Yeah, like when we're trying to arouse our husband, it doesn't do a lot for us, like to perform oral sex on him or manual stimulation of him. I mean, we're happy, we're like, oh, you're having a good time, yay for you. But it doesn't really, from what I can tell, for most women, it doesn't actually really turn you on to see that your husband is really turned on. Now, that's different for men. The way they're wired, when she's really turned on, he's really enjoying that and getting a lot of pleasure out of that. This is like Christmas morning to him, to see your naked body, to be touching your genitals, to be touching your breast, to be touching your body. That's the best part of his day. Absolutely, hands down, the best part of his day. And if he is actually getting bored, then you're bored too, most likely. And you all need to kind of mix it up. And a lot of times you need to back away from the genitals and go to somewhere else on the body that we would not consider necessarily a sexual part of the body, but a part that, you've got this whole skin all over you. And to, what do you like some lighter touch? Are your feet sensitive? What does the back of your neck feel like? My head is really sensitive. I love having my head rubbed. And for women, you were talking about, Francie, women wanting to like connect more with their body and feeling disconnected. A lot of times when we're feeling pleasure in another part of our body, something's going on down there. But we're so used to not noticing anything going on down there. But if we will, like, if he's rubbing your hand and it feels nice, actually like draw your attention to your genitals and notice, do I feel anything in my genitals? Am I feeling a warmth? Am I feeling, am I lubricating? And not in a spectatoring kind of way, because that actually decreases sexual desire, where
Mhm.
you're like, oh, am I getting excited? I hope I get excited. Oh no, I'm not getting excited. I need to, that is actually detrimental to
Right.
arousal. But it's more like just noticing, oh yeah, like I actually can feel something
Mhm.
going on in my genitals, and connecting that, and then telling him, oh, I really like that. That feels really good when you're just tickling my palm.
Yeah.
I just love that.
That is
And
such great advice. So maybe if the climax of the orgasm has become too pressurized, realize that your whole body has erogenous
mhm,
zones, that by God's good design and his extravagant love for us, place nerve endings all over.
mhm,
Like, I guess I've heard of nipplegasms or
mhm, yes,
neckgasms. And it's the idea of if you can tune your mind to the fact that different parts of your body can connect with your genitals, that counts as a way of living aroused with your husband and being sensual and becoming orgasmic. That it's
yes,
not like a 1 + 1 = 2 every time. It is the beauty of our whole bodies being female and enjoying that and not having to be in a box.
yes. And I think for us as Christian women to reclaim the word erotic,
Mhm.
because we see the word erotic and we're
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
pornography, or, erotic literature, or, 50 Shades of Grey, and I don't want to go anywhere near that idea of eroticism. But if you read Song of Songs in the Bible, it is
Yeah.
erotic
Yeah.
poetry. It
Mhm.
is very erotic. And it just, that idea of that eros, that
Mm.
passionate kind of love, and that it is erotic to take a bath together, to take a
Mhm.
shower together, to soap one another up slowly, to sit there and rub your palms, to rub your feet, to have your head rubbed, whatever it might be. That is erotic, to get a massage.
Mhm.
And the if we can connect our body with more eroticism, then a lot of times then that vasocongestion, that blood flow to the genitalia begins to happen, which then produces what's called the orgasmic platform, which is something that women need in order to have an orgasm.
Okay, let's get into that.
Okay. Yes. So that is where there has been enough blood flow that the genitals are now ready to have it. It's like catching a train. You have to be on the platform to catch the train. And in order to catch an orgasm, you do have to have the orgasmic platform. So that's why, if, for instance, you're on blood pressure medication, that can make it hard to have an orgasm. Or for a man, it can make it hard to get an erection, because it's decreasing blood pressure.
Mm.
And that's why your physical health is an important part of your sexual health,
Mhm.
because it's about circulation. So when people
Right.
have diabetes or anything, heart disease, things that
Mhm.
are affecting your circulation of your blood, it can affect you and impact you sexually as well.
Yeah.
So paying attention to that and kind of figuring out, how can I balance? If you're on your blood pressure medicine, we need you to take your blood pressure medicine.
Right.
But talking to your doctor about, what are some other things I could do? Are there things I could do with diet and exercise, nutritionally, exercise, to maybe reduce my blood pressure medication, so that I could have a better genital response, and then it would be more pleasurable? Or like with medication, I'm currently on Prozac, which is a
Mhm.
antidepressant. It's an SSRI. And one of the things that they do is they can kind of numb that genital response a little bit. They
Mm.
just like they kind of numb me in terms, it's harder for me to cry. And it kind of numbs my genitals a little bit too. And so, like, what I will do is have sex right before I take my medicine, because
Okay.
it's lowest in my bloodstream at that
Right.
point.
Okay.
And then, so I have sex, then I take my medicine. So we're trying to work, once we understand how our anatomy works, then we can say, okay, these things are affecting my anatomy. And how can I, work them so that I have the best physical response possible?
That's so good. One thing that you've told me or taught in the past was that about the relation with testosterone in our bodies and how it's highest in the morning. And most women I know, and young couples or old couples, think sex at night, 11
Yes.
o'clock at night, we're exhausted, but we should do it because it's been a while. Help us think differently about that so that we can actually enjoy it more. And it is working with our body.
Well, if you think about it, Francie, the only reason why we're having sex at night is because we're taking our clothes off and we're actually getting in the bed. So it's convenient. But it doesn't actually make for the best sex, because as you said, women, upon awakening, your testosterone level is as high as it's going to be, and it drops as much as a third to a half throughout the day. So if you're waiting until 11 o'clock at night to have sex,
wow,
it's going to be probably the least pleasurable as a woman for the sex that you do have. So if you will have sex in the morning or at lunch, or even when you take a nap, and then that'll refresh your testosterone level. Women only have about a tenth of the testosterone that men do. And so we have testosterone receptors in our brain. We have them in our genitals, we have them on our nipples, and we have them under our arms. I don't know why they're under your arms, but tickling could be a thing. So, we want to maximize the amount of testosterone that we do have as women. And if you don't have testosterone in those receptors on your genitals, it's just not going to be as pleasurable, which is why vacation sex is usually the best sex we have, because we're sleeping more, we're not stressed out, we're having sex at different, not just at night. And it just feels better, because when we're fatigued, fatigue lowers the levels of sex hormones in your body that create desire and pleasure. So when you're really tired, your body's chemistry is just not working well. I know sometimes with my husband, I'll say, okay, let's have sex, but I am so tired tonight. I know it's not going to feel that great for me. Let's wake up a little bit earlier tomorrow morning and have sex tomorrow morning. And for a woman, usually you don't have as many things going on in your brain.
It's true.
And so that helps. And then you're more relaxed and your testosterone level is higher. And so a lot of times women can be very surprised at how much better their body will respond in the morning.
Wow.
And men are slower in the morning. It takes them longer to get going. So if you have a husband that tends to ejaculate too quickly for you, having sex in the morning, he'll be slower.
Okay, so that's one more question I want to ask about, and then we're going to have to pause it and take you into next week. But what about if the husband goes too quickly and you don't have enough time? Is there a way to navigate that, to slow him down, or to work that out so that you don't always finish and then you feel like, well, I guess that was it, and you move on kind of disappointed?
Yes, great question. As I said, men in the morning typically things are going to move slower for them, so that can help. Also, to realize, you're training your body and his body how to have an orgasm. So if you're always basically like, okay, we've been fooling around for like maybe 10 minutes and I just feel like I'm not getting excited, let's just do it, just go ahead, let's have intercourse. You're training him like that's all his body needs. And that's not good training. We want him to make love to you. And that, just because there is an erection doesn't mean we have to do anything about it. And typically, if a man is really making love to his wife, he may get an erection and then it may kind of wane while he's stimulating her. And that's okay, because erections are like the sun, they will rise again. And it is also okay for you all to have a sexual interaction and for him to not orgasm, for him to not ejaculate, that it was just about you, that he just brought you pleasure. And then he's got an erection, but y'all are out of time. And it's okay. It won't kill him. He won't die. And so
it'll make it better for him the next time, because he's going to be all excited for you, and he'll be texting you. And
yes. And I think that's good for couples to have that kind of variety. And that can help prolong things for him as well, if every time he is not ejaculating. He may not like that, but over time, that just makes for a better, fuller sex life. And it's also helpful. Men at some point are going to probably have erectile issues. That's just the statistic is like 40% of men in their 40s have occasional erectile issues. 50% of men in their 50s have occasional erectile issues. That means like 70% of men in their 70s have occasional erectile issues.
Wow.
80%. So, and if he has prostate surgery, he may not be able to get an erection at all. So if your sex life has been all about, he has to have an orgasm and ejaculate in order for us to have said we've had sex.
Yes.
Then that's going to come back to bite you when when erection can get difficult as you get older.
I think you nailed it on that. I think gotten a lot of questions about, well, is it okay if one or both of us don't orgasm? Is it still sex? And I think rewiring our brains to realize this is a celebration of oneness and pleasure and unity, and all the hormones still flood through you get oxytocin from that cuddle time, and you get all of those good things. It doesn't have to be a formula. And do you have some closing thoughts on just like rethinking the idea of sex, that it doesn't have to be his orgasm or him first? It's the celebration of each other.
Yes. And this idea that it's okay for her to have an orgasm manually or through oral sex, and then maybe he has his through vaginal intercourse. I mean, it's like eating. There's a whole varied, you don't always, sometimes you want a snack, sometimes you want a smorgasbord, sometimes you want, a regular meal, and that's what a sex life should look like. So I would encourage them to focus on her orgasm first, however that comes. If that comes through the use of a vibrator, if that comes through oral sex, if that comes through manual stimulation, and if she's already had an orgasm that way, she is more likely to have an orgasm with vaginal intercourse, because everything is primed for that. That doesn't mean she necessarily will, but that helps prime things for that. But it is not the pinnacle of sex for you both to have simultaneous orgasms while having vaginal intercourse. It's just one way, but it's not. Yeah. You don't get any awards when you get to heaven for having, y'all get a gold star in your crown because you were, a lot of times trying to have simultaneous orgasms is so much pressure. So I'm trying to catch a butterfly, you're going to smush it.
And then when it does happen, you can just be like, wow, that was awesome.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was awesome. But it wasn't like, that was like I can tell you that's not necessarily the be all end all of sex. So
that's so good. Well, Jennifer, we're going to have you back next week because we want to cover questions that our listeners have sent in, things about sex after 50, things about vibrators, things about multiple orgasms, and lots of other questions. So thank you so much for joining us, and your wisdom and insight is invaluable. And we're so glad that you are one of our special sex mentors.